This is a story that's lived in my heart for years. One I keep returning to. It happened on an unremarkable afternoon, the sort where time feels suspended and every moment stretches just a bit longer. I was settled in my armchair, listening to the steady drone of my aging space heater when something broke the stillness. A tap at the door, not urgent or demanding, just tentative, like whoever stood outside wasn't entirely certain they belonged there. I rose and pulled the door open to find Michael, my grandson, standing on the threshold. Months had passed since I'd last laid eyes on him, and even that encounter had been fleeting and strained. His hair hung a bit shaggier now, and faint stubble dusted his jaw. But what stopped me were his eyes. Something had shifted in them. Not quite sorrow, but a heaviness, like he was holding words too big to carry much longer. "Hi, Grandma," he said quietly. His tone was calm, but the silence that followed those two simple words revealed everything he hadn't yet said. I moved aside and welcomed him in, my chest tightening with both happiness and concern. Once inside, I made tea the way I always had when he was small, hoping the ritual might ease whatever burden he carried. We settled across from each other at my worn kitchen table, steam rising from our mugs like an invisible thread connecting us. He skipped the pleasantries entirely. Instead, his eyes dropped to his cup, his finger tracing its edge in slow circles before he finally met my gaze. "I've been reflecting on a lot lately in family, on everything between us." I held my mug still. Something in his voice warned me this wasn't an ordinary visit. He leaned back, creating distance between himself and the confession waiting on his tongue. "I know I've been absent, and you might think I stopped caring, but that's not true, Grandma." His voice wavered on that final word, and suddenly I glimpsed the child who used to sprint into my embrace after class. I gave him space, letting the quiet settle. The kettle made soft pinging sounds as it cooled, the air growing dense with unspoken truths. At last, he spoke. "I've been holding on to so much, things I should have told you long ago, things I wish I hadn't kept buried." And just like that, my modest living room transformed into a capsule, where the world outside ceased to exist. He hadn't finished, but I could already sense the magnitude of what remained. Whatever followed would alter something between us. Perhaps not everything, but enough to leave its mark. Michael went silent after that, his attention drifting toward the window where daylight was surrendering to dusk. Pale amber light filtered through my cream-colored curtains, painting delicate shadows across the tabletop. I noticed his jaw clench slightly, the way it had when he was young and afraid to voice something difficult. I sipped my tea slowly, refusing to rush him. Experience had taught me that Michael spoke when ready, and pressure only pushed him further away. He drew a long breath, as if summoning courage. "Grandma," he started, his voice barely above a murmur. "I've been adrift. Not the kind people mean when they're just having rough days. I mean truly adrift, like I've been wandering through heavy mist for months, maybe years, unable to see any direction forward. I kept it to myself because I assumed nobody would understand or, even worse, they'd look down on me." His words cut straight through. My first impulse was to reach for him, but I held back, allowing him to continue. His eyes searched mine for any trace of judgment. Finding none, he pressed on. "I've been carrying this shame," he said deliberately, "about not coming around, not picking up the phone. I know I blamed work, schedules, responsibilities, but honestly, I didn't know how to face you. I felt like a failure, like I wasn't the person you'd hoped I'd become." The space around us seemed to contract, the heater's hum fading beneath the weight of his admission. I remembered all those afternoons I'd stood by the window, scanning the walkway for his silhouette. And here he sat, revealing he'd been haunted by those same empty moments, feeling their absence as deeply as I had. I extended my hand then, covering his. His fingers were warm but rigid, and I offered a reassuring squeeze. My pulse quickened. Outside, a gentle breeze rattled the skeletal branches against the glass, their tapping like nature's encouragement. He inhaled deeply, meeting my eyes with newfound resolve. "It's about decisions I've made over these last few years, things I've kept from everyone, not Mom, not Dad. I've been terrified to acknowledge them because I thought it would change your opinion of me." He paused, swallowing deliberately. "But I think I'm finally prepared to be honest with you." In that instant, the atmosphere felt electric, like those suspended seconds before a thunderstorm arrives. I didn't yet know what revelation awaited, but I understood it would remain etched in my memory forever, just as his earlier words already had. Michael eased back in his chair, his chest rising and falling in a measured rhythm. I watched his thoughts churning, weighing each word before deciding it was safe to release. Outside, the winter light had mellowed into subdued gray, and kitchen shadows stretched longer, seeming to gather closer as if to bear witness. He rubbed his hands together anxiously before speaking. Grandma, 2 years back, I made a decision that upended everything. I walked away from my position not because I'd secured something better, but because I couldn't endure it any longer. Each day felt like something was hollowing me out from within. I told no one because I didn't want them thinking I'd surrendered. I figured if I stayed silent, maybe I could resolve things privately before anyone discovered the truth. I felt a pang of sorrow, not disappointment, but the ache of knowing he'd shouldered this burden in solitude. You shouldn't have faced that alone, I said softly. He shook his head, a faint, almost rueful smile appearing. I understand, but I was stubborn. Too stubborn, probably, and after leaving, everything unraveled. My savings evaporated faster than I'd anticipated. I relocated to a cramped apartment downtown, and there were stretches when I wasn't certain I could afford utilities. I grabbed whatever work I could find, delivering goods, scrubbing office buildings overnight, and through it all, I kept thinking about you, wondering if you'd feel disappointed in me. I leaned closer, hands clasped, my gaze locked with his. Disappointed, Michael, I could never feel that way because you're trying to find your path. Life doesn't follow straight lines, and sometimes the unexpected turns teach us the most important lessons. His features softened, but something else still lingered in his expression. That's not everything, he admitted, his voice dropping further. I began spending time with people I shouldn't have. Not terrible people exactly, but folks who were trapped in similar circumstances, who'd convinced themselves there was no escape. We'd gather and complain about life's injustices, persuading ourselves we were destined to remain stuck. I let that mentality consume me. It diminished me. Grandmom made me smaller than I've ever felt. I could feel the burden in his confession, the shame he'd been living with. But there was also something else emerging, the faintest glimmer of optimism. So what transformed things? I asked quietly. He hesitated, then looked directly at me. One evening, I was heading home and passed the old library we used to visit when I was little. I can't explain why, but I went in. I hadn't stepped inside in years, and there was this book sitting on the same shelf where you used to select stories for me. It discussed beginning again, about how it's never too late to rebuild, regardless of how far you've fallen. I don't know, something about it reminded me of you, of how you've always had faith in me, even when I didn't earn it. His voice fractured then, just barely, and he quickly cleared his throat. That's why I'm sitting here, Grandma. I want to begin. Outside, complete darkness had fallen, and the heater's gentle hum mixed with the occasional whistle of wind slipping through cracks in the window frame. I don't want to return to who I was, he said finally, his voice firm now, as though speaking it aloud fortified him. I've wasted too much time pretending everything was fine, too much time keeping you distant. I'm finished with that. My throat constricted. Michael, every single day offers a fresh start. What counts isn't how far you stumbled, but how you rise afterward. He nodded, a small smile playing at his lips. You always make it sound so straightforward. Not straightforward, I corrected gently, but achievable. He studied the table briefly, then returned his gaze to me with an expression almost childlike in its openness. I want to visit more regularly if you're willing. Not just during celebrations or special occasions. I mean genuine visits, conversation, preparing meals together, maybe even repairing that old birdhouse in your yard. The image made me chuckle, quietly, and for the first time in years, the laughter came easily. Of course I'm willing. I've been hoping for that knock on my door for so long. Something shifted in that moment, not just within him, but within me as well. I understood that all the quiet afternoons I'd spent wondering about him, all the lonely evenings I'd stared at the vacant chair opposite mine, had guided us to this point. Not a flawless reunion, but an authentic one. We relocated to the living room, and I retrieved a box filled with old photograph albums. We sat shoulder to shoulder on the sofa, the soft glow of the lamp casting warmth over the pages. Michael's laughter echoed through the room as we turned to a picture of him as a toddler, wearing mismatched socks and clutching a toy truck like it was the world's greatest treasure. You were obsessed with that truck, I said, smiling. And you were obsessed with reminding me I couldn't bring it into the bathtub, he replied, grinning. We conversed for hours about trivial matters, significant ones, and everything between, and through those conversations, I felt the distance between us dissolving. the years of separation collapsing until it seemed as though he'd never left at all. When the hour grew late, he rose to depart. At the doorway, he paused, then drew me into a firm embrace. It wasn't the brief, courteous hug of someone fulfilling social expectations. It was complete and lingering, the kind that communicates, "I'm present now, and I'm staying." "Thank you, Grandma," he murmured against my shoulder, "for refusing to abandon me." I held him tighter. "Always, Michael, always." As I observed him walking down the pathway toward his vehicle, I recognized something profound. The words he'd spoken that evening, the ones about wanting to begin anew, about refusing to do it in isolation, weren't merely aspirations for tomorrow. They were evidence that the boy I'd cherished his entire life was still there, and that he'd discovered his way back. And now, when I reflect on that knock at my door, I don't simply hear the sound of his knuckles against wood. I hear the resonance of his voice, the authenticity in his eyes, and the quiet certainty that no matter how distant we might drift, we'll always navigate our way back to each other.